In October 2015, when I was a junior in high school, I was deep into my horror phase, obsessed with everything scary and supernatural. With Halloween approaching, I was also reading a lot of scary stories about Ouija boards and people's experiences with them. My curiosity was piqued, so I ordered a Ouija board from Amazon. When it arrived, I waited for a night when our parents were out to use it. I convinced my little sister to join me, and we set up at the dining room table with the lights dimmed. We both held the planchette, and I asked the board some questions. At first, we laughed because it felt awkward and funny. I started to move the planchette around, trying to creep my sister out, but she knew it was me. After a few minutes of this, we were getting bored, and my sister wanted to stop. I suggested we try for a few more minutes, but eventually, we decided to give up. My sister went to her room, and I went to mine. I continued reading Ouija board stories online and looked up why it hadn't worked for us. Many people said that nothing happened their first time using one. I decided to give it another try that night around 1 a.m. after my sister was asleep. I went back down to the dining room, dimmed the lights again, and tried using the board once more, asking similar questions but speaking more quietly to avoid waking my sister. I held the planchette with both hands, waiting for it to move, but it didn't. Instead, I heard sounds from upstairs, soft footsteps. It could have been my sister, but it was followed by a muffled female voice. It didn't quite sound like my sister, and it was coming from directly above me. The room above the dining room was our older brother's, who was away at college. My sister wouldn't have been in there. I went up the stairs quietly, and the voice grew louder as I approached my brother's room. I thought maybe my sister was playing a prank on me, trying to sound like an older woman to scare me. I reached the door, put my ear against it, and heard the voice of what sounded like an older woman. I couldn't figure out how my sister could mimic a voice like that until I realized the voice was repeating, "Grandma's here, Georgie." It was the voice of my deceased grandmother. My hair stood on end. I opened the door and turned on the light, but no one was inside. The voice stopped. I ran to my room, locked the door, and curled up under the covers, feeling the room spin as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. It was too vivid to have been imagined. When I calmed down, I said a prayer before trying to sleep, but I was awake all night. I still remember that night vividly, even after 8 years. From personal experience, I can tell you that using a Ouija board is a huge mistake. In the summer of 2013, my friend had a vintage Ouija board that was supposedly worth a decent amount of money. He agreed to trade it with me for a video game I never played, so I made the trade happily. I tried using the board on my own, but it seemed to be a scam. I didn't really expect it to work. I mainly got it just for the potential money. I tossed the board on the floor of my living room and forgot about it. Everything was normal until the next morning when I woke up and found that the 2 plants on my coffee table had been knocked over, and the Ouija board was now sitting on the table. I didn't remember putting it there, and I couldn't understand how the plants had fallen over. Wind was definitely not the cause. I wondered if I had sleepwalked or maybe was half awake and bumped into them while getting a glass of water. I put everything back in place, but the carpet had dirt stains from the spilled soil. I moved the Ouija board box to my room and tossed it on the floor, hoping to forget about it. That night, while lying in the dark, I was disturbed by a muffled clicking sound. I looked up, unsure of what it was, and saw through the cracks in my closet door that the closet light was on. I had no idea how it could have turned on, but I got up and opened the closet door. There was nobody inside, but that didn't even cross my mind at the moment. I turned off the light and jumped back into bed. About 10 minutes later, I heard the clicking sound again. My heart sank when I looked at the closet and saw the light was on again. A mix of confusion and fear started to build up inside me. I turned off the light once more and cautiously got back into bed, expecting the light to turn on again. Instead, the entire room suddenly lit up as the main light switch flicked on by itself. I'd had enough. I quickly put 2 and 2 together and tossed the old Ouija board in the nearest dumpster. Nothing strange happened after that. One night, I had some friends over, and we decided to try out an old Ouija board we'd found in someone's trash. It had the board and the planchette, so the 4 of us took turns holding the planchette and asking silly questions, just messing around. At all times, one of us would move the planchette to trick the others. When one friend went to the bathroom and another got bored, it was just me and another friend left holding the planchette. I asked the board when I would die, and the planchette began to move slowly to the letter T. I laughed, thinking my friend was moving it, but he insisted it wasn't him. The planchette then moved to O, M, O, and R, spelling out, tomorrow. When my friend let go of the planchette, it stopped moving. I was convinced he was playing a prank, but he swore he wasn't. The next day, things took a frightening turn. While walking my dog to the park, his collar suddenly snapped, and he bolted into the road. I chased after him, only to hear the blaring horn of an approaching car. I dove out of the way just in time, barely grazing the car with my foot. Later that same day, while sitting in the kitchen under a ceiling fan on full blast, I got up to get something from the fridge. Suddenly, I heard a loud crash behind me. All the glass on the table shattered, and the fan had fallen from the ceiling, just inches from where I had been sitting. I don't know if it's just a coincidence that the day after the Ouija board predicted I would die, I had 2 near-death experiences, but I do know one thing: I'm never touching a Ouija board again. As far back as I can remember, we've always had one of those old vintage Parker Brothers Ouija boards sitting in our closet, collecting dust. When I was a kid, I was always curious about it. From the box, it looked like a strange board game. One day, I learned what a Ouija board really was, so I decided to dig it out of the closet. I insisted that my brother try it with me, and eventually, he agreed. We put our hands on the planchette, and I began asking typical questions like, "Is there anybody there?" And, "Can you answer me?" Aside from my brother jokingly moving the planchette around to imitate responses from some entity, we didn't get any real answers. Bored, we put the board back in the box. That night, I did some research on how to make a Ouija board work. I found that many people said the best environment for using a Ouija board was a dark room lit only by candles. So, when our parents were out, I gathered 6 or 7 candles and convinced my brother to try it again. I set up the candles around the dining room table, turned off all the lights, and we tried one more time. I asked if there was anybody there, and the planchette began to move. I told my brother to stop moving it, but he swore he wasn't. I asked him to take his hand off, and he did, but the planchette continued to move. My brother thought I was messing with him, but I wasn't. The planchette landed on the word, yes. I was only 9 at the time, so I was genuinely freaked out. My older brother took over and asked, "Are you a good spirit?" After a 5-second pause, the planchette moved to spell, "No." At this point, I was terrified and ran to my room, shutting the door behind me. My brother continued with the game, and then I heard him scream at the top of his lungs. I rushed downstairs to find out what was wrong. He was holding up his shirt, revealing a small open wound that looked like a claw mark. He told me to start the fireplace immediately, and I obeyed. He threw the Ouija board into the fire and told me never to speak of what had happened to anyone. We haven't used a Ouija board since. In their mid-20s, the user joined their friend George and George's girlfriend Mandy, along with her friend Carly, on a trip to a supposedly haunted abandoned house. Mandy, who enjoyed exploring paranormal locations, brought a Ouija board and a candle. The house was eerie, filled with dusty furniture and old portraits. During the Ouija board session, they supposedly contacted a spirit named Gregory, who claimed to have been dead for 30 years. Initially skeptical, the user and George suspected Mandy and Carly of moving the planchette. The atmosphere became unsettling when they heard a loud thump and footsteps upstairs. George and the user decided to investigate, finding a decayed bedroom and hearing an exhale from a closet. They quickly rushed back downstairs, only to find the girls, the candles, and the Ouija board gone. They exited the house and discovered that Mandy had blocked George, leaving them unable to contact her. They never saw Mandy or Carly again and were left wondering whether the girls were pranking them or if something supernatural had occurred. I've never really talked about this before. We had a huge closet full of old board games, and one of them was a Ouija board. I'd always been curious about it, but with my family always around, I never felt comfortable trying it out in front of them. Then, one weekend, my parents went to the city, and my brother went on a Boy Scout campout, leaving me with the house all to myself. I was more excited about trying the Ouija board than about having the place to myself. The weather was terrible, windy and rainy, which seemed perfect for setting a spooky mood. Around midnight, I set up the board in the dining room and dimmed the lights. I asked a bunch of questions, but nothing happened. Eventually, I gave up, put the board away, and went to bed. In the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of creaking downstairs by the front door. At first, I thought it was nothing, but then I heard it again, closer this time, near the stairs. My concern grew with each creak until they were right outside my door. Then, they just stopped. I lay there for what felt like hours, clutching my covers and waiting for something to happen. A flash of lightning briefly illuminated my room, and I thought I saw a dark, limb-like object wrapped around the edge of my door. I held my breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The worst part came next. My door suddenly slammed shut, making me let out a terrified shriek. I was completely under my covers, shaking and crying, feeling like I was going to scream. All the windows in the house were closed, so there was no draft. I was convinced something was in the room with me, but nothing happened. When the sun finally started to rise, I mustered the courage to peek out from under my covers. My room was exactly as it had been before, empty and untouched. I searched the house for any signs of a break-in, but everything looked normal, no broken windows or unlocked doors. Then, I saw the Ouija board sitting on the table again. Being a bit superstitious, I immediately connected the events to the Ouija board. I threw the board in the outdoor trash can and brought it out to the curb. Since then, nothing else strange has happened. I've never told anyone about that night because I knew they wouldn't believe me. You wouldn't understand unless you've been in a similar situation. The only people who know about it are those who read my story online. I'm convinced that those events were connected to the Ouija board. I got a call from my cousin about a strange experience he had with a Ouija board. He, his brother, his dad, and his best friend were using it in their basement. Before starting, they moved a large, creepy porcelain doll out of the room and placed it face down on a pile of towels in an adjacent room. My cousin took a short break to use the bathroom, and while he was gone, his dad, brother, and friend continued with the Ouija board. They asked it a question: who is in the other room? The board started spouting random numbers. When my cousin returned, his brother showed him the answer, which turned out to be his own social security number. Feeling unsettled, they started asking the board more questions. It told my cousin he would die in the Air Force. Alarmed, they demanded the entity prove itself. The board then spelled out the word, doll. At this point, they had a really bad feeling and went to check on the porcelain doll they had moved. When they opened the door, they found the doll standing upright, staring directly at them. Everyone freaked out and ran out of the house. My cousin's best friend burned the Ouija board, and reportedly, he went a bit off the rails for a few months afterward. For some reason, my cousin eventually joined the Air Force and is now stationed on a base in Europe. Surprisingly, a lot of people have Ouija boards tucked away in their closets, gathering dust. Most probably never even use them. I first learned about Ouija boards when I was 16. Curious, I asked my mom if we had one, and she told me there was indeed an old one buried in the closet with all the board games. This closet was in the basement, by the laundry room, a small space filled with my parents' old stuff. I was intrigued and slightly superstitious, so I asked my mom to help me search the closet without messing up how everything was neatly arranged. Eventually, we found an old, dusty box labeled Ouija, with two hands holding the planchette, the piece that moves around the board. The box was falling apart at the edges, though my mom said they'd only used it a few times. Excited, I texted a few friends to come over that weekend while my parents were out of town. My friend Liam, who was 17 and had a car, picked up my friend Jack, and they came over around 9 p.m. My younger brother, Adam, who was 14, was also home, so I invited him to join us. We decided to play in the loft, which had been converted into my bedroom. We turned off the lights and placed a flashlight in the corner of the room, pointing towards the board. All four of us sat around the board, holding the planchette, and started asking questions. Since none of us had done this before, we asked basic questions. I asked, if there's someone here, move the planchette, and to our surprise, it started moving to the word, yes. Adam asked, how old are you? And the planchette moved from the number 6 to 767. We all looked at each other, and while I suspected one of them was moving it, we continued to play along. Eventually, I asked, are you a demon? And the planchette moved to, yes. We all laughed and broke immersion, knowing someone was likely messing around. But then, the flashlight turned off. We stopped laughing, and everyone got really scared. We checked the flashlight, but it wouldn't turn back on, even after pressing the button repeatedly. I turned on my bedside lamp and saw the frightened looks on my friends' and brothers' faces. I said it was unsettling that the flashlight died at that moment, though part of me thought it wasn't just a coincidence. We decided to stop playing and went outside to the backyard, trying to calm down. When my friends left and Adam eventually went to bed, I had to sleep in that room. I put the Ouija board back in the box and brought it downstairs, feeling uneasy about having it in my room. As soon as I turned off the light and tried to fall asleep quickly, something in my closet fell over. I sat up, startled, and looked towards the closet door. I turned on the bedside lamp and walked over to the closet. It was a small walk-in closet with a light switch on the outside. I turned it on and saw what looked like two shadows of feet at the bottom of the door. Panicking, I screamed for Adam and ran to his room. I explained what I saw and led him back to my room. By the time he arrived, the closet light was still on, but the shadows were gone. I opened the door, but there was no one inside.